All right, welcome once again, everyone, to 1, 2, 3 Chess. My name is Luke,
And I'm Tom.
and we're here to do the final section of our analysis that we've been working on from our game one. And this week, we're going to be honing in on the specific 3 or more moments in the game that were our crucial moments, which we chose to do a deeper dive. And then after we each discuss those, we will end with some of our key findings, maybe anything else we studied, and a Grandmaster game that we each memorized that was relevant to this. So looking forward to this. So since I went first last week, Tom, if you'd like to begin your 3 or so moves, and we will hop in it.
Sure. Just getting right into the game here, we started out with a Danish Gambit on my part. That was declined for D3, recaptured with the bishop. And I should, before I get too far into here, say last video I actually identified let's see here. I think I might be getting too far ahead. I think it was this knight move here, perhaps, as my move.
Mm-hmm.
Because whatever it was, I had decided, once I started getting further into the analysis of the game, I really started saying, you know what, the move that I identified, you know what, I think it might have been that one. It might have been that
I think it was.
Start an attack. I said, you know what? The problem is once I started looking into more Masters games, this move is really the move that stood out. It's also the move that ended up getting me into a little bit of trouble throughout the game. If we fast forward a bit into our game, at one point in time, and it probably should have been sooner than this, but at one point in time, Luke captures my bishop there, and I had moved it there with the anticipation of being able to recapture with that pawn, opening up this F file. Well, mission accomplished, that happened. But as the game progressed, those doubled pawns just ended up really hurting me. I mean, you can really see it more than anywhere else in this position where I've got my my queen and my bishop lined up for an attack down that diagonal. I'll just give you a million of those. An attack down that diagonal against that pawn. That's what I set myself up for. But these two pawns are just devastating. And so that was the really iconic move that I kind of identified that was deviation from kind of what higher level players than me were doing. And I could really see the reason why, okay, that's a bad idea as a move. And so the question was, well, what are other people doing at this moment in the game? Like,
Yes.
what ought I have been doing? And this is where I saw some really interesting options. The first move that really blew my mind, because you saw later in the game, I moved this pawn out to A3, and I thought, you know, I don't really know what I'm doing. I guess I'm doing that to open up these diagonals for my light squared bishop. And I felt like that was kind of this nonsensical move. Well, hilariously, a lot of high-level players at this point in the game are not doing A3, but instead, opposite side of the board, H3. And it's really interesting because H3, never would have thought of it. I'd be looking at it from the perspective of, well, I'm weakening the pawn structure around
Me too.
Yeah. But if I look at it, the big move that is stopping is bishop to G4.
Mm-hmm.
And it's neat because it ends up stopping the bishop either on this square or this square. So it really really contains that dark squared bishop to a large extent. And if you get that bishop landing on this square, oftentimes what the attack ends up trying to do is land a knight on d4. And then that knight landing on d4 ends up, forking that knight and the bishop, which is just it's a cleaner attack. So that was one move that I looked at. There was that h3, and I think it's decent. One of the really funny things is at this point, in our previous video, in our first video actually, I said from my position as white, I really need to develop that bishop before I develop the knight. I was pretty adamant about that. And my logic behind it was, if I take that knight and I move it to d2, right? It could move there. If I do that, it blocks
blocking the bishop.
It blocks in my bishop, and
exactly,
so then when am I ever going to be able to move that bishop? Now it's stuck. That was what was going through my head. Bishop is stuck if I move my knight there, so I shouldn't move my knight there. I need to move my bishop first. Interestingly enough, one of the most common responses here, one of the most common moves for white is actually bringing that knight out. That one really just did a number on my head, seeing that move. This transitions, though, into a few different lines of attack. What's interesting is that's really just this temporary spot. It's usually treated as this sort of temporary spot by higher level players. And then when you see something like, now this bishop is coming out to there, right? You will see the knight either go to one of these two squares. And so you had that transition move of dropping that knight there, which temporarily contained that bishop, but it was just a temporary thing. Another move that you might see here too that's really common is bringing that rook out into the e file, and then you're not worrying about trying to open up this file by doubling up pawns. Instead, you're just saying, okay, I'm going to bring the action to the center of the board, which is always very beneficial. So that was kind of how I saw that move play out in the various games. I did not do that. I brought the bishop out, right?
Mm-hmm.
So and Luke backs his bishop up there. Like I said, it probably could have been taken earlier. It could have probably even been taken as early as that move and doubled up those pawns. I felt overconfident in it and left it there this entire time, didn't facilitate the trade, was working on that attack, which then gets completely shut down. That was my last opportunity to trade off those bishops. She does it there. My stuff is doubled and I'm stuck. So that was the first move that I really dissected.
Yeah, that makes sense. I was looking at that move a lot, even though that wasn't the one I chose.
So then the next one that I looked at was actually this move here. Queen takes d7. And this was just much too rushed on my part. And it was really funny because during our last video when we were really looking at this, Luke pointed out a couple of things to me which I just, was oblivious to. I wasn't even thinking about. The big thing is, I've got this queen here in an open file, which seems pretty good. So I've got that file that I've been working on, and he had just moved his queen there, right? I'd originally been the only one in that file. But the diagonal that I wasn't really paying attention to was this one right here. And that's a pretty cool diagonal because the king is right there. Now, the brilliant move that I missed here was actually bringing the queen up.
And I think you mentioned that in the previous video too, right? In the second video? Yeah, that's cool.
Yeah, I mean, the biggest difference that this would have made, I mean, so Luke could have done an exchange, right? And if he did, I would have ended up getting rid of those doubled pawns, which would have been really nice. That would have given me a nice attack here on the queen side, going into the end game.
Not bad. Transposing doubled pawns into a pawn duo, not bad.
Right? But in all likelihood, he probably wouldn't have done that. I'm guessing after looking through this position a little bit more. Oh, and one of the things I didn't point out as well, when I did the move that I did and I took that queen, the biggest problem that I created was I just helped him activate his knight as well. Because right now it's stuck in that back row, which is exactly where I wanted his knight to be. So if I had instead brought that there, we would have gotten something probably more along the lines of either king dodging, or maybe even defending with the queen, at least taking that out of that square. At which point in time, you know, the exchange is still an option. I probably wouldn't have done the exchange because I still have those pawns. He's not going to facilitate there, but that's just going to make an attack. I had mentioned that I had a problem with I didn't have a strong enough attack on this side to be bringing my knight over and actually doing something. Well, if I've got that queen over here and I've got the knight over here, it's just going to strengthen up a lot, because we've got he can't do this because he gets stuck in a lot of places. You know, he can be dodging, but now he's got my queen back here. That's just going to be wreaking havoc.
Yeah.
So that was the other one that I ended up looking at, and that was a little bit of a change, I think, from the one that I had pointed out in the video that I said I was going to analyze. But again, it was kind of one of those pivotal moments in the game that I really thought, wow, that was a big deal. As we went on, the other move that I really ended up sticking with was this one here. And that was really, I really wanted to look at this because I wanted to really be intentional about, like, okay, the way that this thing ended up going was I'm dodging my queen all over the place, and I didn't know how to close it with this last pawn, and I ended up going to a draw. Which, if you know a little bit about chess, you should know that if you've got one queen against even 3 pawns, you've got quite the advantage.
Yep.
You should be able to close that game out and turn it into a win. So this is the move that I was really looking at, and this move here really actually is pretty solid. This was a decent move. The other move that I really looked at that would have been a good choice as well would have been bringing the queen down to g1, checking his king. They really all accomplished the same purpose, and here I didn't really look so much at each individual move to figure out like what the best move pattern would be, rather than really focusing on what you're trying to accomplish at the end game in a scenario like this, and how to do that. The biggest thing was, you know, just getting this queen down in front of uh, those pawns. We're trying to stop the advance of the pawns, and I want to, in the process, bring this king over to start help.
Yep.
That's the plan. This first move, it actually does accomplish just that. It's getting the queen involved, it's putting the queen in pawns. That there, he can't move this pawn up. He can't move this pawn up. King's in check, which is kind of a common theme that we're looking to do, is keeping the king in check when possible and preventing pawn advances. Just looking at it again, this queen is already in a good position because it's still preventing that pawn from advancing. And it's still preventing that pawn from advancing. This pawn, however, could come down. I brought that king down.
Again, solid move.
Again, solid move, because now he can't bring that pawn down. So I've now controlled all of these squares with my two pieces, which is really what I wanted to be doing. Gotta move something. He ends up moving a pawn. I take. That's the name of the game, is weed off these pawns one by one, right? I get in check there. And this is, it's interesting that it's at this point that I started feeling flustered, because honestly, up until this point in time, I was doing pretty well.
Yeah, it's psychological, I think.
Yeah, I had this check happen against my king, and it was like, am I doing bad? Like, I feel defensive. What's going on? And so he gets into my head, and I do this move right here. And this is, I was going to say this is a bad move. It's not a bad move, because the thing is, you still can't advance that pawn, and you still can't advance that pawn, right? And so he does that. He moves his king back, right? Instead of sacrificing a pawn for no reason, he moves his king. I move my queen in there. Again, really solid move. I'm preventing that pawn from advancing, and I'm blocking his king from moving to very pivotal squares. That is the exact spot I want my queen. And then I say, okay, I'm getting my king in the game, which is exactly what I said I was supposed to do. Boom, boom, boom. And then we get here, and this is where I killed myself afterwards, thinking like, how did I screw that one up so royally? I took with my queen. And I took with my queen, and I put him in check, thinking to myself, yeah, I'm putting him in check. I want to put him in check at the end of the game. That's my goal, is continue to put him in check. But it's not, putting him in check is not the end goal. It's not what you're trying to focus on. You're trying to control that pawn advance. And that did nothing to help control that pawn advance. I brought my king in, but that's what I should have done in the first place.
Exactly. Yeah.
So on this move, if I had just taken my king and captured there, again, my queen was already in a great position. That pawn advance can't happen. If he moves his king to this position, that's checkmate. So at that point in time, the game was pretty much over if I had captured with my king. But instead, I captured with my queen, and then did this little dance, just allowing him to advance his pawn. And then we got here and did this little dance. And I got to this move, and I thought, okay, that's exactly where I want his king to be, which is accurate. I'm preventing the pawn advance, right? And I want to bring my king in, which is what I did. And then he went here, and I just looked at this board, and I thought, I can't put him in check. The only squares that I could put him in check with my queen are those three squares, and he could attack my queen with every single one of those squares. And so I thought, like, I can't do it. I can't put him in check. I don't have any options. And so I just blew the entire game with that move right there, when instead I should have moved my queen there, which would have pinned the pawn to the king, and I still could recover at that moment. So yeah, those were really the three key moves. The last one was kind of more of a series of moves. I did a lot of practicing my end games this week to make sure I wouldn't fall into that sort of error again. Not that it won't happen again. We all continue to make mistakes, but I already could see by the game that I was playing with Luke today. I could see in that my studying of the end game was already providing me a lot of support and making it so I wasn't throwing away the game as we move to the end game.
Yeah, totally. Can I interject something here on the board now?
Yeah, absolutely.
So I think going back, if we go back a few moves here, I think one thing that, at least for those of us who are not like super high level players at any point, I think right at this point when we kind of got into this dance of checks, I think one thing okay, so the last pawn's eliminated. For simplicity's sake, I think one thing that helps me, especially in blitz games and more pressuresome situations, is you know just bring that just bring that queen all the way down and
Yep.
right here. If you just plop her right down in the pawn will never get there. And
Yep.
so that principle can apply in any situation where it gives you enough time to do that. And then also the other thing is any of the squares on the end on the seventh rank. So if it's the opposing player's turn and your pawn is getting ready to be promoted to a queen, but is right here, right here, right here, or right here, then it's going to be a draw if played properly. But if if that pawn getting ready to be promoted is on one of these squares, then the other person has a chance to then you have a chance to promote it to a queen and win. So that's something that I studied up as well this week, and it was a helpful principle. Just those two things in mind: trying to get in front of that pawn that's on the way to a queen, and also to remember when it's possible to have a draw and when it's possible to have a win.
Yep.
So, anywho.
Cool.
Well, thanks, Tom. I think all those moves made perfect sense in terms of which ones were the crucial moments. And even if they're not the same as mine, they were definitely huge in the decision-making process for mine too. So,
All right. Well, Luke, fire away. Take your analysis. So back it up to the beginning there.
sweet. Okay. Um, so now with mine, so first off, let's just kind of go through. So we get to this point where now, okay, and Tom already mentioned this move right here was, I almost picked this one, but this is the first move here by White that actually deviated from master games that I had seen. So that was interesting. Um, and then as we continue this progression, we get to the point here where now so one thing, what I did is here, I took a step back, and at this point of the game, I said, okay, well, let's look at the board in this position. Due to an aggressive tactical opening and an extra move by Black, in retreating my bishop right here, uh, now he has 2 tempo ahead of me, or 2 tempi, however you. And so the idea here is now Tom is already entering the mid game, just pretty much. I mean, his mindset is going to start to shift to now developing a plan how to utilize these pieces he's already developed. His rooks are already connected, and he's already castled. So I mean, he's got a lot going for him. So those were things that were good. Now, if we look at some of the stuff that is not good, there's a few different problems that happen here. Number one, so there's 4 problems I found that need to be addressed on the white, which affects my position. Number one, he needs to open up this diagonal for his bishop and queen, which is blocked by this pawn here. Number two, what about the ever so present threat between the 2 bishops against each other? Like, what are we going to do with that, and how does that affect the rest of the game? Number 3, this knight right here is one of his weakest pieces as well, because it's cramped by this pawn and his other knight. So it needs to find a good place to be developed. And then number 4, and finally, is the fact that he needs to find a good file for his rooks and to have that opened up. So I first took a step back and thought of that first to see what it was like on White's side. And then from there, I started to look at what my possibilities were. And here's what I found. So basically, he's already castled, his minor pieces are developed. He's got these 4 different things that he's trying to work through and resolve essentially. And then on the flip side, let's look at my position. Well, as black, my position is very different. I'm 2 tempo behind, as I already mentioned. And I also have far less attacking possibilities. In fact, the challenge for me in this game, which kind of came out in our first and second videos, is I didn't really know what to do here. Like, when we got to this point, I mean, I was behind tempo, but I'm like, okay, his attacking is very clear. Like, he wants to do this, right? But what about mine? I mean, I got not really a lot of direction going for me. I mean, I have a bishop that's eyeing down his king, but his bishop could trade off. So that's kind of weird. Then what do I do? Bring this over here so that I can kind of like pin this to nothing. I mean, there's not really many obvious things from my perspective as a mid-level player. So I looked at, okay, what are my problems? I have 4. I came up with 4 as well. So what do I do about the dark bishops eyeing each other down, obviously? Number 2, how do I maintain this e4 pawn blockade, which prevents the diagonal I already mentioned? Okay, number 3, how do I develop my light square bishop and queen? Okay, and then number 4 is what kind of attacking or strategic game plan should I establish, as I already mentioned? So that brings me to my first move, which is knight e5. Okay, so I did this move in order for my d6 pawn to be able to, after he decides to take me, which could probably happen, then, well, I could take him back, and then now this is further jammed up, which ended up happening. So that was my idea with why I did it. And what I didn't realize, see, this is where I took a step back and I'm like, okay, however, I didn't really think this through all the way, because after he takes and then, I take, now, wait a minute. Now this piece can plop over to where he wanted to go in the first place, toward my king side and in a great position. He's just solved one of his 4 problems. And furthermore, I'm still not addressing this situation, which he can take and double my pawns at any time. A separate topic, but still nevertheless important here. So that's another thing that I had to keep in mind. And then also, so really what I was thinking here is I'm like, okay, this whole time, why did I wait so long to take this? This is what kind of Tom already mentioned, but the doubled pawns ended up being, like a thorn in his flesh, so to speak, for quite some time in this game. But I waited quite a while and I backed up until finally I decided to go for it. So that was certainly interesting. So anyway, after his knight takes me, my pawn takes him, then basically the idea here is his knight would swing over here and his position would be strengthened. So this is my strongest piece right now, my strongest minor piece on the board right now, aside from this guy who could get taken. So that being said, if I take this piece, well, that piece was already kind of blocked anyway. If I take this piece, well, again, he moves this here. So the whole point of this move really kind of falls short of what I was hoping to gain by it, as I'm getting rid of my strongest piece in the board in terms of the minors. So if I had taken that, he simply would take it with his knight, solving his positional problems and eliminating one of my strongest minor pieces. And if I took his bishop on d3, or if I took his bishop, yeah, on d3, then that would be no skin off his nose, because again, that was one of his weakest minor pieces anyway. So anyway, as I go on, I made a lot of notes in this as I was looking at this deeply. But basically, what happened here is I should have focused, and it's funny too, because after I was done all this, I looked at the chess engine, and it kept wanting me to do this in terms of the actual, like, I mean, again and again it said, like, I don't know if you saw that, Tom, but it was like inaccuracy, blunder or mistake constantly because it kept wanting me to do that with the mathematics alone. Which again, that kind of is what I'm trying to get at with this whole thing. There's other things I could have done here. I could have, moved this pawn up, right? So that was another option for me. Um, there's not really many things going on here. Obviously, you have this one too. But anyway, so that was my first move, and my whole point in bringing that up is that I really needed to utilize what tools I had, and one of my biggest tools was this guy right here. And it's not that this move, moving this knight here wasn't a good idea, but it's that it was a little premature, and I should have let him suffer a little bit. As I don't know Tom, if you saw that one review by the higher level guy, that's what he said. He's like, yeah, I mean, it's not a bad move, but like the timing was off because this piece should be there purposefully and at a time after he's tried to figure out all this junk he has back there. And in the meantime, why don't I clear off a piece of the board to give him double pawns, isolated double pawns in the center, blocking his diagonal. I mean, that's three things. So anyway, so that was the first one. Now, as we move on further on in the game, the interesting thing is, so now we get to move 14 here. Okay, so this is where it's definitely mid-game, right? And it's definitely a lot more tactical and strategic with a lot more open space. So now that here's where the thing is that a lot of these exchanges have already happened, things have been cleared off, and so now that those are finished, the F file has been opened, right? Or at least semi-open. So now his rook is eyeing my knight down there, and then additionally, we got these doubled pawns here, and then we've now entered the mid game. So that's my point. Now that we've entered the mid game, he swings his knight here. Obviously, he's now connected with my isolated pawn. So when he's doing that, that's the immediate threat. So how do I respond to it? Well, obviously, I bring it to a place, my knight, so that it can protect there. So, but here's the thing I didn't realize. First of all, when he has his knight there, what is wrong with me taking it? Well, my thought process is if I had taken it, then that knight's off, so then he takes me back with his bishop. But now my concern is that now this is going down the diagonal toward my king. The problem here is that I was thinking exclusively in a mid-game perspective, and I failed to realize that if you eliminate all these pieces, let's say, take, now we got each one minor piece, a queen and two rooks, not too long, we're talking endgame stuff. We're talking, here's the point in which all of the positional advantages and disadvantages for each of us in pawn structure and all of those things come into play. And now it's not really a mating attack that's the concern. It's really the end game performance. So that was probably my biggest failure. Also, I did not realize that, look at this. I could have brought my knight here. It would have still been guarding this pawn. And now we got an obvious one here if pieces are moved and a fork happens. Or then I can swing my queen into the action, eyeing down his king, so that now we got a mating threat. So there's a lot of stuff going on this side of the board that I didn't even think about or utilize. And it would have also forced him to be on the defense more. So then he would have to, move his queen toward this direction. He would also have to be a little more prudent. And then, he's left thinking, what is my bishop to do? There's a lot going on there. So that was another thing I thought as well. So I just think, while this move wasn't a bad move, it's still, I didn't look at my other two options, which in conclusion were I should have probably thought about either taking it there and not being too worried about his bishop eyeing down toward my king, or maybe try do something a little more creative like this, which has a little more attacking potential. So that was my second move. And then now if we move on toward later on in the game, we're going to get to a much different scenario. Okay, so now obviously this is a crucial point of the game where we're getting ready to enter a potential kings and pawns only endgame. And in this position, this move, when I took my king and moved him right here, this is what caused me to not only equalize the position, but arguably get at a point where I can actually go for the win. So though this seems simple, these endgame positions are clearly showing what a chess player is made of, and the next few moves prove to be really crucial. So he moves his king back there in a little bit of a kind of a prudent or cautious fashion. And so then the next move, now our knights are traded. This is the point where, I mean, Tom, if you remember in our first video, I burned up a couple. I mean, look at what happened next. I just start burning up pawn moves down below. Like, what's the deal? I mean, what I was doing is failing to actually address what I needed to do in the first place, which is let's go for this. So doing that, if you look through this carefully, I mean, I analyzed the living daylights out of this and looked at all these different variations of what could have happened. But the bottom line is, once I got here, your obvious move is here. That we kind of got there in a few moves. But then if you look at everything really closely, you'll see that one of two things has to happen. Either A, all of our pawns get taken and it becomes a draw pretty much, or the other thing is I promote a queen a pawn to become a queen before him, namely most likely this pawn here. So that whatever happens there, it's going to become a very tactical, queen and king game, or I just start, racing over to go for these pawns and try to eat these guys up. But either way you look at it, it's at least a draw and at best a win for me at this position. And the fact that I moved my king here and back here, I mean, I was just avoiding the very thing that I should have been confronted. So that was probably one of my most helpful realizations, is just the crucialness of calculations in the endgame structure and pawns.
It's a
And
lot of counting.
yeah, a lot of counting. So anyway, all that to say, those are my three moves. And yeah, so
Definitely learned something. All right, so as a bonus, we just wanted to share with you that we memorized a Grandmaster game that was similar to the game that we played, just so we could get a better idea of what higher level players were doing and how they were treating the same opening. So without further ado, I will kick it off with that.
all right, let's do this.
Oh, and Luke, just for reference for any viewers, who is the Grandmaster game that we're watching here?
It's Miguel Cordoba, and then what's the other dude's name? Eslon Yan or something like that. And
Yeah,
it was in 1984, and I think this game was played in Spain.
yeah. I say Grandmaster too. I guess I don't know what specific level they could have been.
I'm not 100% if Eslon, the guy playing black here, I'm not sure if he was an international master or a grandmaster at this time, but I think they were both grandmasters.
Okay. And you'll notice this game so far is a little bit different than our game because that knight is already out and it didn't start with the two center pawns. But we're going to see the transition into a game that you should recognize if you followed our previous videos. That should look remarkably similar right there.
And already we can see some differences here, deviating.
That's that big deviation which we discussed in the video. And this right here was part of the reason we chose this game for analysis, was because that bishop ended up on that same square as what my bishop was. But you'll notice it's protected by a knight in this game, whereas mine I had to recapture here with a pawn.
No doubled pawns this time. And no batteried attack with the queen and bishop this time either.
And that was that move that I was saying I wanted to do, but
yeah,
too.
exactly. Yeah, that was the other theme. I actually forgot to mention it when I was going over my analyses. I had way too many words and too little time to go into everything, but that was one of the things I was going to point out is that pawn, that F pawn wants to advance with the rook there, obviously.
Yeah.
Okay.
And one of the things that Luke and I have both discussed at this point is that knight retreat I just saw to G8 is a really cool move.
Yeah.
Already informed my teams.
Talk about an aggressive white attack here, as you all can see. It's yeah, it's pretty intense.
Definitely seizing on the of this opening.
One of the key elements of the chess universe is space, and yeah, we can definitely see that white wants a lot of space here for his attack. And I pointed out before, that I would not have taken it with the queen. That was interesting. That was a very unique move, very grandmastery theme. Okay, and there we go. Now it's very interesting what happens next here after he moves that pawn there and how I just ignore it and get ready to, threat taking the pawn.
Going
Middle.
after E4, yeah. Yeah, I definitely would have intuitively responded to that pawn coming in there. Probably with a move something like H6.
Mm-hmm.
But instead the exchange happens.
And then, of course, most intermediate or lower level players would just take it. But what does he do? He does this.
And now White has to defend that undefended pawn.
Mm-hmm. And now, only now, does he snatch the other pawn. Okay. Now he's going to reroute his knight to try to now he's got 4 pieces covering the E5 square. Okay. Now, let's see.
I also don't know that I ever would have intentionally stuck my queen in the back row like that too, knowing that my rooks were both in the back row.
Yeah, I know. I mean, even though, queen H5 isn't too hard to see, it's still, I don't think most of us would have thought through that.
And then this is one that really is blowing my mind is I would definitely just intuitively say the E4 is going to capture the D5. I'm opening up an attack onto that queen, but
Totally. It's so it's so different. Like, yeah.
my pawn.
What? And why put the knight there? Like, I mean, okay, you're opening up the queen to H5. I see that, but where's the knight going to go from here? Okay. Obviously, Aslan sees the queen coming there, so he's going to prepare to put a block between his king and the attacker.
I think a large part of that too is was attacking that F5 pawn, which was going to be used as support for the knight to E6.
Mm-hmm.
It doesn't do much for an attack though when you got a queen sitting in front of it.
Yeah, that much is true.
And this is where you just start seeing the pressure just mount up very quickly against black.
And that's one of the beauty of looking at a lot of these grandmaster level games is you just don't see any premature attacks. By the time they're ready to attack, they are ready.
And again, interestingly, just not gobbling up that pawn.
No. But it makes perfect sense. It's looking like a matter of time at this point, and indeed it is.
Yeah, and that's
Because,
just a devastating move there.
and then the very, very unique ending where we have the knight taking that. And
Yep,
there we have it.
that's the game. That and then Black resigned at this.
Yeah. So interestingly, a Scotch game transposed into pretty much the exact same position we had, but then instead of moving the bishop out earlier, doing a little bit maneuver, with knight and everything, it was great.
Yeah, and I mean, I think we went over most of the key elements. There were some that I saw here. If I get into this, um, in this game, I thought one of the interesting things was moving that A4 pawn out. A lot of the variations that I've seen of this game have actually brought out that B2 pawn, which attacks that bishop. And actually, I've seen that pawn come up a bit that to A6 for black, with the anticipation of that B4 move being played, uh,
Yes.
because it provides the square for the bishop to retreat to. So I thought it was interesting that White chose not to do that. I also, one of the thought this was a move for White that has just I really struggled with memorizing because I wanted to take that knight every single time.
Yeah. Yeah.
And the capture doesn't happen, which ultimately like clears some of that space for. I mean, that's ultimately the square that the queen lands on, which
Mm-hmm.
nice diagonal up into the to attacking the king. So
Yeah, totally.
you
Yeah.
said,
What's that?
you have anything else to add?
Yeah, I want to go back real quickly, piggybacking off what you said. So the only thing I can conclude here is that why you mentioned about pushing the A pawn. The only thing I can conclude is that Miguel had to have known, he had to have already in his mind, I think, had a game plan established with bringing his bishop out. He knew his knight was ready. He already prepared to do that. And so he was taking up more space on that side, preemptively knowing that he's not going to need to push the B pawn yet because he's already going to exchange the bishop out there.
Really, I mean, really interesting. It goes to show you what how much more there is to learn. If you're looking at games and saying I'm struggling to understand why they're making the decisions they're making, that shows you there's a lot out there. Um,
Totally.
and if they were watching our game, I'm sure they would be watching our game just going, oh,
Why?
why would you do that? that's
uh,
that's chess. It's funny. I mean, the more advanced you become in your knowledge of chess, the more purpose all of your moves seem to have, which it becomes really interesting as you watch people that are below your level. You start to view some of their moves as being appearing to be more random. Like how did that move happen?
yeah, and I think I think I've begun to learn that a lot of it is because their pieces are actually coordinated. They're actually working in tandem. They're actually working together for a plan. Whereas with most of us, even some of our best moves, for me, like I'm like, oh, that was a cool series of moves. But for me, I still have a perspective too narrow focused on, oh, that was a good placement for that piece. That was a good placement
Yes.
for this piece, but failing to really comprehend the bigger picture. How are those working together?
And on that bigger picture, just the one thing that I want to go back to here, because I loved it. And it really has influenced my games. If I can hit that move. This one right here was that knight move to G8. Um,
Yes, yes.
because the you're burying that knight into a corner, which just like from for me raises so many red flags. Like I'm never gonna put my knight into a corner like that. You've limited the squares that he's attacking to what
Yeah.
squares at that point.
Yeah.
But that white pawn is moving up the board and assaulting, And this gives black an option for defending without breaking up that pawn structure, which is just really neat.
Yes, yes. It's almost like he's taunting white and saying, "All right, you move that F5, the F pawn up to F5. I'm going to make you prove that it's worth it."
Yep, absolutely. So, yeah, very, very interesting game, definitely.
Totally.
All right, well, thanks for joining us for another week of chess. And next week, that was it for our analysis of this game. Next week, we will be doing an analysis, starting with an analysis of a new game.
Yeah, Tom, did you want to go over real quickly any of our final takeaways after we did the study?
Oh yeah, I mean, I think the final takeaway that I had, the biggest one that I had, was the importance of the end game, which is
Yeah.
fun. Even bringing up the end game when we were playing the first game. I had made the comment right there: don't rush, and really think about what you're doing. Um, but a lot of those end game principles need to be practiced. Some of them are not obvious, um, and you really want to sort out those end games because there are a limited number of options that are actually going to occur in an end game scenario. And if you have those principles down pat, then once you get to the end game, you're in just so much better of a position
Yep.
um, to either win or stabilize and get your draw if you can work that out.
Yeah. Cool. Yeah, I mean, crazy me. I have my 4 points here, but I'll be really fast, I promise. So, number one for me was an opening theory one. So I looked back at the game and I saw here that, once we have E4, E5, and it doesn't matter if you go from a Scotch game where you have the knights come out first and do something kind of like this, or if you go the route of a center game. Either way, by the time it gets to this point, I didn't have much experience with the best ways for black to respond to this move here. And so after doing a lot of studying on, opening theory at this point and kind of looking at what grandmaster games, what options are out there, I ended up finding out that one of the safest options for those of us who don't want to get into really dynamic games, and I'm a positional player, is something simple like this. So D5. So that was one of my key takeaways, and it's a lot easier to play. It's much more equalized position. It kind of neutralizes a lot of the threats, keeps from the insane attacks it could ensue. And then my second one is with the game phase transition. We mentioned this earlier on in this video, but the transition to an end game mindset. Anytime you're looking at trading pieces or making an exchange or any sort of tactical threads and stuff, always keep in mind what part of the game you're in. I know it sounds stupidly simple, but for me, we looked at, I think it was like move 14 or so back when we had the bishops and knights dancing around, kind of who's going to take first. If I really had the idea in mind of like, okay, we're almost getting toward the end game now, it might have provoked me to take a piece sooner, so then I could actually force my position as to which type of piece I want in the end game. Do I want a knight? Do I want a bishop? And what color squares is that bishop, uh, owning? And then number three for me was endgame principles, like what Tom just said. Premature pawn advances, though, specifically. There were three at least for me. I don't know if Tom, if you had any, but either way, those things are deadly potentially because they remove your option for tempos if you need them later on. A repertoire of tempos. Tools in your tool belt in case you get to a potentially zugzwang position and you don't know what to do. But I burned those babies up when I should have, really been forefront with my king. And then my fourth one is very much the same as what Tom just said. I actually need a basically I need a fundamental and kind of systematic approach to learn the end game better. So what I've committed to do, you're hearing this on camera, everyone. I'm committing to reading through I have it already, but I haven't read through it. The Silman's complete Endgame course. You can look it up on Amazon. It's one of the most popular ones out there, but it's not, glit and glamour and stuff. I mean, this is like textbook size stuff, but it systematically goes through every, level of knowledge for it. And so I'm going to be going through that, one at a time. And who knows, maybe next time I see you guys, I'll actually have gone through a few of those chapters. But that's it for me.
Yeah, I do think one more thing that I just wanted to touch on was um, the night move that occurred that I really shied away from. Uh, oh, I'm looking at our game right now. Uh, I just not being afraid to bring my knight out before I'm bringing that bishop out. I think that was another big takeaway for me too. Um, just because it can be a temporary position, it's not stuck there forever.
Yeah. And be forewarned, if you pull that bishop out first, I'm probably going to attack it earlier, and I'm going to give you those doubled pawns and make you prove that it was worth it. So,
Absolutely, absolutely.
cool. Well, anything else you wanted to add?
I don't think so. Thanks for tuning in, guys.
Thanks, guys, and thanks for bearing with us. As I know this has taken a little longer for us to articulate things, as it's our first time, but I'm really stoked about what the future holds. I really hope you guys take seriously some of the principles that we're showing here as we're learning them ourselves. And I'm hoping to post a video soon with explaining step by step of exactly what we went through in this process. So have a wonderful week and continue to improve your game.